Hi, I'm John Alec Briggs, and this is,
I'm Josh Brown.
and we are the directors of Ouachita's opera program. In this season, I served as the director, and
And
Dr.
I
Brown,
served as the music director and conductor.
yes, and together we pulled this thing off. I remember back to after we had just finished our production last year, which was Auferstehung's History, Heinrich Schutz's quasi opera. We approached it as an opera, and it was really a successful production. Um, we had a great. Well, not only did we have a great time doing it, the students had a great time. They learned a lot, and I think it was a great project to do. And but we decided after that. Remember, we were talking that we wanted to do something really more in the traditional vein. We'd done for several years um, non-traditional operas. We had done speed dating. We had done Billy Blythe, Bonnie Montgomery's folk opera about Bill Clinton, and then we had done Old Maid and the Thief, which is pretty traditional. And then Josh, you came on board, and for our first production, we did Alfred Steng's History. So we looked around, we looked at our casts, and realized that we had just the right personnel to do Gianni Schicchi, which was something we'd wanted to do for a long time. Ouachita's done it twice before. The first time we did it, I was a student,
Just a
1986.
few years ago, right?
Yeah. No, that was only 2007. Actually, it was 1986, I believe.
Oh gosh.
I played Simone on the same stage where we just did ours. And Dr. Tom Bolton was the director at that time. And then in the mid 2000s, the first decade, actually, I believe it was 2005. Now I think about it. Um, John Seacrest did Johnny Skiki again, and they did that over in JPAC, a much larger, fuller scale production. So this is three times that we've done this here at Ouachita. Each time very different. And I remember we talked about, and feel free to jump in here, Josh, anytime. I'm just going to ramble on. We talked about wanting to cast a little early to give the
Mhm.
kids time to look at music, and also to give us some time to really mull over exactly who needed to be where. Um, and before we talk about that, let's talk about the way we decided to do this opera. Remember, we used the organ last year, and
Yes, we used the organ for the Schutz piece,
yes,
and we enjoyed that. The students did it. I think John and I are like equally committed to. We have this beautiful instrument, and we're committed to trying to use it as much as we can. And it also has a cost savings dimension, which is lovely because you'd spend thousands of dollars to contract out players where we can really adequately compensate an organist if we schedule it right and make the use of that and get a lot of the same colors and sonorities in the piece. And of course, the way we use the organ for the Schutz versus this was going to be completely different, but we kind of had a plan for that. And so we wanted to have a transcription of the orchestral score made for our organ, but also made in such a way that it could be used for other productions on other organs. And there doesn't exist an organ, piano, percussion transcription. So that's a unique thing for this particular production. But that was one of the initial concepts we were planning to do before COVID hit, before we had to make any other adjustments. And so it was interesting that remained a central part of the plan, even though a lot of other things were changing all around it. So,
yeah, that is interesting how that we talked about. I believe we had actually even already spoken to Jason.
oh yeah,
Howdy. Yes, at that point we had already begun talking to him about how this process would work. Um, but so that was that ball, and that ball started rolling and just sort of went right on. No matter what happened, it just. And it's a good thing we decided to do that because I don't think anything else would have worked
yeah, absolutely.
in the end. So we scheduled auditions for the first Friday in March, I believe. It was first, or the
It was
first,
before spring break,
yes,
right? I think it was in the middle of, yeah, it was before
some
spring break.
during the week one day. And within a week, we were out of school and gone home.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
we actually didn't cast until the kids were home. We let them know once they were home and how they could get their scores and such.
I
Uh,
remember them asking, they're like, when are
yes,
we going to hear about the opera? I think we originally thought we were going to turn around a cast list in like 2 weeks,
yes,
which is kind of a long time. Still, 2 weeks to turn out a cast list from the audition. But when the pandemic hit, I think we were all like just trying to survive, going to remote instruction for the end of the spring. Because voice teachers were having to transit. I mean, all of our applied lessons folks were having to change to online instruction. All the traditional faculty members are having to change. We were trying to figure out what to do with ensembles. So there was a lot going on that kind of put the casting of the opera on the back burner. Then I think by the time the spring semester was over, we had communicated out who was
yes,
chosen to do what role.
yes,
And we had even like gotten our hands on some resources to help them prepare and told them what score to purchase and sent some things out. So we were well on our way in terms of preparation musically, well, at least giving them resources to prepare musically even before the end of the spring semester.
I do remember at that point, we still anticipated doing a live
Oh, yeah.
performance. That wasn't even something we thought might not happen. And I'm
Yeah,
not,
because I guess at that point, right, John, we didn't know, COVID was so new, we had no idea what the repercussions or the guidelines would be in terms of, the Arkansas Department of Health was just starting to deal with this. I think at that point, like my wife is a public school teacher, the public schools in Arkansas were still going. And so we were still trying to figure out, how to survive with this COVID thing going on. And then we didn't know what rehearsals would look like. I think when we left in the spring, we thought we'd be back in the spring. Like there was an April date that we thought we were going to come back to campus.
that's right, we did, because we planned a couple of sing-throughs.
Yeah.
Um,
And then and because I remember coming, I think you were there, John, we had a calendar meeting
yes,
for
we
what
did.
the rest of the spring was going to look like when we came back.
Yes, because that's when we figured out when we could do, because we wanted to get 2 sing-throughs in before we sent the kids home, because the idea was that would put the fear into them of realizing exactly how much
Oh,
work
yeah.
they needed to do. Um, but we were able, and Susan Monroe, our rehearsal accompanist, put together anything that anybody asked for. I don't remember how many people did, but a few people asked for
Some
specific.
did.
Yes. But we also, you found that great resource of the rehearsal tracks
Mhm.
that people were able to use, which was
I can't remember the name of the website, but there's a website that has lots of mainstream operas available where you could purchase rehearsal tracks, which was a wonderful resource. It just, the tracks were really fast. So I think that was a challenge for our singers because as they're starting to learn it and it's going at performance speed, and even some of those performance speeds were faster than what we ended up going ultimately.
yes, we did the Southern drawl version
Yeah.
in many places. But then there was there was a point at the summer when it became clear, and it really wasn't until August
I think so.
that we knew for sure that a live production wasn't going to happen. And I, I'm not really exactly sure how we arrived. Well, and to be honest, this is the point at which I don't know. I mentioned this to you a couple of days ago, Josh, that we jumped off a cliff and started building our wings on the way down. And this is literally where that happened. We, to be honest, there were days we didn't know what was going to happen the next day.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we just kept going. And it's interesting. Several students have commented that they were so grateful that we had planned things so thoroughly.
Which is hysterical given, but there's part of it though, John. It's like, I guess it was reactionary in that,
Yes.
we were like, we have no choice but to try to plan even more, specifically because time is such a more finite resource than it was a year ago. Because like a year ago, with John being on campus, we could divide the cast in half, and we had 2 rooms, so we could go to the choir room with half the cast, run through some musical numbers, and the pacing was just.
Yes, and that was one of the really reasons we decided we could tackle this opera, especially in the timeline we gave ourselves, because for other reasons we gave ourselves a shorter timeline, and we scheduled to perform a few weeks sooner than we initially anticipated. And we really had to stick to that timeline because the weekend of recording, our organist, Jason Salge, had committed to being with us that weekend, and he couldn't be with us other weekends. So we were stuck with having to end at that point. But I do remember every time we hit a problem, we simply addressed it as, what can we do? We never, oh, we can't do this, we can't do. No, it was always, what can we do? How can we take another step forward? And sometimes there were many choices. Sometimes there was just one. And it'd be interesting. Sometimes that one choice would then open up lots of other things. But every single day of this production, once we got back to school, I anticipated being shut down the next day.
Oh, yeah. I think we all came into this. Well, I mean, most all the faculty at Ouachita was probably in the back of our minds thought there was some kind of at least remote chance that we weren't going to finish out the fall semester.
Yes.
Now, I will say that it's my opinion that we were set up really well for success by our HVAC team and all the deans and, staff at Ouachita that helped make guidelines clear, that they kind of took what the Arkansas Department of Health gave the state and made it clear for Ouachita. And I think,
they made it function. They made it so that we could still function and still do things, but there was a checking system in place that would pull people out, and that's what happened, and that kept us moving forward, and it would never have happened without that support system.
Yeah.
But we did decide that we were going to try and film. And which is really interesting, since
neither one of us have done that.
Didn't have a clue what we were doing.
Well, it was a good thing though, John, that we had an unlimited budget for filming, and so we were able to hire all these consultants, and
yes, it was really lovely. Yes,
filled in the gaps, right?
Is that music endowment that we have, the opera endowment specifically? Yes, it's such a blessing. Anyway, yeah. But we didn't have a massive endowment, but we did have 2 angels who came in.
That's right.
Mark and Maggie Garrett. Maggie's one of the voice professors here, and Mark is her husband. And they came in and not only financially supported us, they also, Mark's gift of time, and Maggie's as well, both of their gifts of time to this production, it just wouldn't have happened without them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would film, right? Or we would do a music recording session, right?
Yes.
And Mark and David would be here because David was singing and Mark was recording everything, the 18 times we'd run through a set, right? And so Mark would record it, and then we'd all go home, and Mark would go home and sit with Maggie, and Maggie would look at the score and tell him, like, here's where we need to line the audio up here or whatever. I mean, it was a full family affair for them. And when most of us just went home, that was when a lot of their work began. And so I remember the first time, and I think John had a similar experience, that Mark sent an audio recording of the whole opera to us. Now, keep in mind, we'll talk a little bit at some point probably about the COVID restrictions and how we had to do spacing and everything. But suffice it to say, like, John was from a distance, so he wasn't hearing the singers.
We haven't thrown that in yet. We'll cover that when we talk about everything. Yeah.
But I wasn't hearing them either, right? And which we'll talk about why. But like, I recall the first time I sat at my computer and listened to what Mark sent me, and all of a sudden I could hear all of the voices, and I was just like so moved because it was so much better than what I was perceiving in the room at the time. And And I think that was like one of the first times where we started to see, wow, this is really going to be something special and great. And so I don't know, I just think like there aren't enough words to talk about our level of gratitude for Mark and Maggie and the time they put into this to make it just the glue in the seams that took the parts that we created and put it all together in such a beautiful, you know, product.
And Mark really went and studied how to do this as well, because he's very adept at these things. He's done some audio and some video work, but this was moving into equipment that he had never used before to a level of and I mean, I can't imagine all those knobs. I don't know how he figured it all out, but he did. And he spent a lot of time learning how to do what we needed, which is a really wonderful thing that they did. And I know I drove him crazy most of the time, but he really tried to get into my head, which is a dangerous place to go. And really, by the time we got everything rolling and moving, I got to the point that I simply trusted that he was seeing what I wanted to see, because I couldn't see what was in the camera frame.
Yeah.
I'd tell him what I wanted in the camera frame, and it took us a couple of times. We'd finally get that lined up, and then from then on, I just let it go and said, "I'm just going to trust that Mark, he's listened to me, he's paying attention." And when he gave me the footage to look at, it was exactly what I had asked him, exactly what I envisioned in my own head. So.
If not even better, right?
Yes, yes. But he really listened to what both of us wanted. He listened to what you wanted musically. He listened to what I said I wanted visually, and he turned around and he gave us that, which is that's a wonderful thing to get, because we don't always get that. Yeah. But to talk about the way that we wound up recording, so we decided that we were going to, the three of us would get together and talk about what an ideal situation. I'd love to have this. And then we'd talk about, well, these are our technical capabilities at the moment. Mm-hmm. And we would even sometimes try something and realize, yeah, this isn't going to work. So how do we make this work? And a lot of three-way conversations, where we really had to balance. So it sort of became really a three-legged stool. And we each had to work and understand what the other was doing. And I don't say that none of us had to compromise, but we had to work together.
Oh, yeah. And communicate. I mean, communication was like, and it was not perfect, but I mean, we had to spend so much more time communicating all of these various details. Because so for instance, if we go back to thinking about August, NATS and ACDA came out with these guidelines, and I think it was based on the first round of the Colorado study on aerosols and various instruments and singing and blah, blah, blah. And so we kind of had some rough guidelines. And John and I just decided, our student safety is priority one. We're going to take those guidelines and implement them to the absolute best that we can. Because at Ouachita, we don't necessarily know air exchange rates in each of the rooms. We have precautionary equipment that's supposed to circulate air and filter and everything, and that's been great.
We have a rough idea of those numbers.
Yeah, we have an idea, but I think the ACDA and NATS numbers are kind of, they are built to where if you don't exceed that, then you're really safe in a lot of environmental places. I could be interpreting that wrong, but that's what I like to believe. So anyway, so we followed those as best we could to the letter of the law, and that meant that, like in this room I'm sitting in right now, which was our primary space, and a year ago we would rehearse 2 hours on Thursday mornings right here in this room without stopping, or with just like 5-minute breaks because we needed a biology break. Well, now with COVID, the 30-minute rehearsal guidelines, like we could be in this room for 30 minutes from the moment we start singing, and then we are to stop singing in this room, leave the room, and then come back. And we chose, I think, we tried to do 30 minutes to air circulate.
The air moves in that room very rapidly, so 30 minutes was plenty of time.
Yeah. So anyway, so we would do 30 minutes in here, and I finally was able to get with Gary and reserve, our dean, and reserve 2 other spaces during that time, which, oh, by the way, right, our entire campus, in case some of you are watching this and don't know, for the fall and now for the spring semester, huge rooms like this are a premium, right? So there are some, like, let's say, Bible survey class that had 45, 50 people in it. And previously, they could be housed in a room in Pruitt and be fine. But all of a sudden, every room on campus at Ouachita had what we called the COVID capacity. And then classes were moved everywhere, right? So rooms that were a year ago or a semester ago available for us just at the whim are now being used by different departments on campus. So all this to say, it's quite a task on the part of our deans and secretaries to help us find extra rooms at premium times like when opera rehearses, but we managed to do that. And so I remember creating for every rehearsal, you know, this part of the cast will start in this room for 30 minutes and rehearse this, and then they'd come to the recital hall, and then they would go here, and it was just this jigsaw puzzle every time. And then I would send it to John. I remember when I first started doing it, I would accidentally schedule somebody to be in 2 places at once or something like that. So anyway, we developed this system and it worked, but it was challenging. And you know, anybody that rehearses anything at all will understand that, like, you get into this zone. You know, if we're in the middle of a big, a big scene in Gianni Schicchi that has like 8 or 9 voices, and then it's like, and your 30 minutes is up, and we're right in the middle. It's like, kind of kills our flow a little bit. But we had to just let the flow go and then pick it back up in a different room. But then that applied to recording as well. So, you know, that's another reason why, like, we had to have such good communication, because I remember there, like, before we got to the week of recording, I remember looking at and calling John Briggs and saying, we got to do a run through. And we divided the whole show up into these little chunks, because I think even up to the week of recording, we were not completely sure that every part of the opera was quality enough to record. So we just said we would go through and several of us would grade each section and see if we can record everything. And we did 2, I think, of those run-throughs the week prior to filming. And it was interesting because we had to start to instill in the value into our students of, like, you don't have an unlimited amount of times to record this chunk. And I think we prepped them and said, you know, when we start recording, we'll give you a list for this 30-minute recording session. We are going to record these chunks of the opera, and you get to do them 2 times, right? That's it. We only had time to record the audio of each chunk 2 times, and we just prayed that we got something decent. So in some respect, you know, it was stressful because you had such finite amount of recording time. And I think we were really trying, like, okay, so we had to divide our recording sessions into 3 phases. The first was, well, actually 4. The first phase was accompaniment sections only. Like, there were parts of the opera that we realized that we could record just the accompaniment, which included percussionists, organ, and piano. So I remember one of the first nights we recorded in here with just percussion, organ, and piano. Now, because there's not voices singing, we didn't have to do the 30-minute rule on that. So we got a lot of that knocked out fast. Then we had a set where we recorded anything that required all of the instrumental forces to be with the singers. So, like, there's some parts of the opera where there's quite a bit of rubato, where the tempo's fluctuating, or the accompanists and conductor depend on the singers to give us the tempo, and we react to what they do. So we recorded those sections second. And then we went back and recorded the second layer above the accompaniment tracks that we had recorded, where the students had to listen. We had all these earbuds. They had to hear the accompaniment track that we had recorded 2 days prior, and then record their layer over that, right? So at any given time when you're watching, okay, so then there's the 4th, which is the blocking, where I kind of got out of the way, and then John took over. And so he'll probably talk about that in a minute. But so at any given point when you're watching the opera, you may be seeing 4 layers of recording that have been put on top of each other, or 3 or 2. And so it's really interesting how it all kind of came together. And again, that's where Mark and Maggie and the behind the scenes folks really made the difference there. But so John, do you want to talk some about the blocking part?
Yes.
Or
Yeah, and let's talk about the reason we put things in that order is because we decided, and this I think happened pretty much at the point when school started back, and we knew there was a possibility that at any day we could either lose a cast member to
quarantine isolation.
thank you, I couldn't think of the word, or we could, or the campus could. It was there was always a possibility that could happen. So we decided, okay, if we had to stop tomorrow, every day said every day we're going to do what we feel like needs to get done so that we have something, so the students have some final product. So we decided, of course, the most obvious thing to do was that audio has to go first. Audio takes first priority. It's an opera. Audio does take first priority. So our first push was singing. And you're right, we started recording though, but then we had this wall of October 19th, I think it was.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
We had rented equipment. That was the weekend we had the organist. That was our end wall. Yep. Well, because we weren't able to have the rehearsal sessions in the spring, and students naturally, they were just as overwhelmed as we were with everything that was going on. They were having to adapt their own lives, adapt their own way to singing. They're having to sing with a mask, all these other things. The inability to practice together in a practice room, all these,
or even be together. When they're 6 feet apart, even in the rehearsals, that's difficult because they can't hear.
They can't hear your tune. You've got the Puccini, the women's trio, and they need to be together, and they're having to stand 6 feet apart, which,
And then I'm 12 feet probably from them.
Yes.
So I'm not hearing them either.
Yes. But so there's all these little things that at first you're like, well, okay, so you're wearing a mask, but you're wearing a mask and you're doing this and you're doing this. And for many of them singing in Italian for the first time, and for a lot of them singing the most challenging music they have yet sung.
Oh, yeah.
And they're having to do it together, and they can only do it 30 minutes at a shot. So somehow out of that, but we did start saying we'd go through in every session, every week, we would mark down the things that we thought, okay, this can get recorded. This can happen. This can happen. And we had told the students that that it was not going to be, don't take it personally, but we may reach a point where we say, okay, we're not going to do section R, or we're not going to do rehearsal letter. I think they're rehearsal letters in Discord. And it's simply a decision of time. Mm-hmm. That was the only factor that was doing it. It wasn't that we didn't think they could learn it eventually. Anyone in that room was capable of learning this entire score eventually with enough time and with enough effort.
Oh, yeah.
We were asking them to do it really at really professional speeds of someone who'd be brought in to do this with a professional company. But somehow we kept, because the music was more important, we kept pushing further and further into mic days.
Oh, yeah.
And I was I hope you didn't know it, but I was very quietly panicking.
Oh, I'm sure you. I could sense it.
But I knew, but the music was more important, and it was, and I still think, and it was right to do that because the music was the most important thing. But we finally got to the point where the score was done, and then we had to wait, I believe, 2 days.
Yes.
For Mark to get us back a track, because what we were going to then do is lip sync the entire production. And that might normally have been a really difficult thing to do, except this is the one time, the one and only time.
I can demonstrate.
Masks were a good thing. Yes.
Now,
Yes,
John's going to play a recording of O Mio Bambino Caro, and I'm going to move my lips along.
yes, and you're going to think he's singing it, which is what we were able to do. Yes.
Beautiful.
So this is the one time that became our saving grace for two reasons. One, if we were actually singing live, even 6 foot distance, we would have needed to be a little further apart. And plus, they're also crossing each other's tracks. The idea and the understanding behind the guidelines of distancing while you're singing is that you remain stationary. Well, you don't remain stationary in a staged opera.
Yeah.
So the masks were a saving grace at that point, because we did still have to maintain 6 foot distance, but we were able to move and do all the things that we needed to do. So this is where,
Which I don't guess we really said yet, John, that in August, we realized that we weren't going to have John in the flesh.
oh yes, well, we haven't talked about that, have we?
No. So, which I'm surprised we got this far into the conversation,
Yes.
and we've alluded to it. But so, do you want to kind of say a little bit of what your perspective was in figuring that out, and then
Okay. Yes, it
How-
became clear, just for issues of my own issues, I was not going to be able to be on campus in the fall. And Ouachita worked with me. Gary, our dean, he and I spent a lot of time together figuring out how to keep me involved as a teacher, keep me involved as an opera director. And Josh and I had to talk about how that was going to work too. And we figured out how to make it function. I won't go into all the details of how, but basically there's a big giant screen, which I actually didn't even know until about a week before we were done.
they could see it in the cameo at the end of the
Oh
opera.
yes, I do. I'm actually, if you have a really, really giant screen, I'm in the entire opera, because one of our cast members was on quarantine while we were filming. So
The drama part, at least, and part of it.
yes. So we actually, if you haven't seen the show yet, I'm going to give it away right now, but you've probably seen it by now. You will notice there's a character on a screen. I was also on that screen, but I'm really tiny in the corner. So I'm actually in the entire show. Leave it to me to figure out a way to get myself on stage for the entire.
But you're also at the end.
At the end, I get a whole big old cameo. Yes.
Oh yeah, and they see the whole. I mean, you can see the.
You can see the whole theater and see what's going on. And actually, I believe there's a few coats. I think there's a PA, a production assistant, sitting in the audience as well. But, and I thought I was on a little monitor or something. And at some point, I don't remember how or where, somebody had some other camera, or they took a picture.
I
And
think it
didn't
was in our
realize
studio class, because I still have the picture.
my head's like this big. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
had no idea I was like that. So my first thought is, I didn't tell anybody. I thought, I wonder how many times I picked my nose. Well, my head was giant on the wall. So hopefully I did never do that. But I had to direct the show from this machine, which required, because the camera is attached to the machine, in order for me to see the stage, if I'm up on the stage with the cast in this thing, the Moplex is what it's called.
Or Robo Briggs. Or
Yeah, they call
whatever.
it Robo Briggs, yes. If anyone has seen the episode of A Modern Family where with the characters on the little iPad walking around in a robot, I was that version, except I was a big giant television doing this. It didn't.
It's got to be 55 inch.
It's a
I'm
big
looking
one.
at it right now for this interview, actually.
Yes, you are. Yes. Anyway, so this required a student, one of our dear freshmen, Megan Schultz, to sit out in the audience and hold her iPhone facing the stage. That we would zoom that iPhone in, and I would be able to watch on screen what was happening, not only from the perspective of where my eye was in the Moplex, but also the perspective from the audience, which is what I really needed to see. And once we started filming, she would follow Mark around and stand over his shoulder. So that was the closest I actually got to seeing what was being filmed. We tried to situate so that I could actually see through Mark's lens, but there was really no way to do that. So Megan, bless her heart, was like this for hours.
And they would run out of battery on their phone and
We had, yes.
take a little break and charge it up, and they would bring little chargers. And
But so we directed it like that, that had a lot of difficulties in that there's lots of visual things that happen that cue you as to what you're doing when you're in a room with other people, and we didn't have any of those. And we've got our cast will tell you I got a little tense at moments.
Oh yeah.
Um,
I mean, we all did. Everybody.
we all did.
We all were on heightened levels of like, are we going to get this done? Are we going to
Well,
get
that
this?
yes, and a lot of it was, are we going to? Am I going to get a notice tomorrow morning that we're shut down?
Yeah.
So we didn't work into a compacted set of time. We only had 1 week to do
for blocking. I think the first week we were able to finish all the audio by Saturday or Sunday of the first week, and then that Monday you started. I think we finished on Saturday, and then Mark had Sunday, and then
we started on
audio,
Monday.
and then Monday we started blocking.
Monday we had it through the following Sunday. But we should tell everybody we did all of the actual audio recording and filming of the show was done over 2 weeks.
Yeah,
that's a fast production for something an hour long.
Which is also the COVID-19 incubation period time.
And on top of this, we were all teaching our lessons. The kids were all going to their classes. Nothing else changed for them. They still had to do this.
Which also, by the way, because this room is a classroom, it has all this extra stuff in here that normally it doesn't have. So like we have a giant projection screen, projectors, air fans, dry erase board on wheels, the Moflex, carts, and every time we had a rehearsal, and really every time we'd have a recital hour or anything that's going on, evening recitals, Dr. Gerber and the fine arts staff would have to move all this stuff out and then move it all back in so it'd be ready at 8 a.m. the next morning for whatever classes were going to start. I mean, it was like a major orchestration of moving stuff but not breaking it. And then we had set pieces that would have to be moved in and out and everything. And
we had to figure out how to work the piano into the set so we didn't have to move it.
Yeah, because there's like nowhere to move. I mean, I guess we could have moved it, but it was
And it does that. It's a very minimal set, and that explains exactly why. One, we don't have the budget for a large set, and two, there simply wouldn't have been time to move it in and out every time. But the cast worked with that, and that's actually good for them, and it gave us room.
Great experience.
Gave us room to move the camera around. If we had had a lot of set pieces, there would have been nowhere because Mark had his camera. He wore one of those, I don't know what it's called, where the camera can move.
The gimbal.
Gimbal. He had a gimbal.
Gimbal. Yeah.
And
I'm impressed I knew that because I don't know that stuff.
all these terms, things we've learned in the last year that we did not know. But he had two people, one person moving cables, and he had two people working with him the entire time. So anywhere he went, when you watch his production, you'll see it moves around the characters on stage and all that. We had to figure out the traffic pattern for all of this stuff in that 1 week and film it. For the majority of it, we staged, we walked through, and then we filmed.
Yeah.
And I joked with the kids, I call it soap opera approach, where you'll have your script in your hand, you'll set it down, you'll film 5 minutes of something, and then you go on to the next thing. And our kids had never done this before. Our cast had never done it.
And we haven't really,
we've never done anything like this before. So it really became an issue of understanding how to handle continuity and having to remember where you were and what you were doing. And I'm sure you'll find lots of little spots. I don't know, maybe make it a game of who can find, where someone moves and suddenly appears somewhere else. But somehow we managed to pull all that off and get it done just as we finished on Sunday afternoon. We started with large scenes. We broke the show into, I think, 5 separate chunks, and then broke it down within that. We tried each day to work that section. And then we would.
And I guess did you start with like wide angle shots first? And
yes,
then
we started with a wide angle shot of the entire show. Because once again, we wanted to, we had audio. So I said, okay, if we get shut down in 2 days, we can't film the entire show in a night, but we can film the entire show over 2 days. And we did do that. That's right. We, over 2 nights, we simply put the camera in a stationary position and filmed the show. And we may have even done that in a single night. At this point, I can't remember.
All I know, I remember the close-ups being like, bam, 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 bam.
Yes,
like really fast.
So we had that, and then I made a list I went through the entire score of I want from measure so and so to so and so. I want shot over I want shot over Schicchi's character as he's talking to Zita. Then these two characters are going to interact. I want it shot from this angle. Shoot from downstage left. Shoot upstage. Um, this in the frame. And I gave Mark all of this. And what we would do is we'd go one by one, and I'd read him what I wanted. We went over first his entire list, and then we broke down the show into because we did that on Monday and Tuesday. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We had 5 days, and we broke those. We each day was dedicated to a chunk of the show of shooting close-ups, and we would just do them back to back to back to back. And we could do that because they were masked. So we didn't. Now we no longer had this 30-minute time limit issue.
And they weren't singing.
No, they weren't. And we told the cast for the most part, if you know you're in this scene, we're going to sing this scene that night. You got to be there. You got to be standing by, and you've got to be ready because we're going to finish one, and boom, we're going to move to the next. And we would literally only stop when Mark would go, "I got to stop.
I need a break." Like his back. Like we were worried about his back at one
heavy
point.
camera. Yeah, I think it 30 pounds or something. You know, I'm not sure how much it weighed. He's carrying a very heavy camera, moving around and doing all these shots.
For hours.
For hours, yes. And it's interesting, if you watch the show, we start at the beginning. We got pretty good by that 5th day. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, because we're all perfectionists, Mark and I are like, oh, I wish we could go back and shoot this, or wish we could go back and shoot this. But I really like watching as the characters develop, so does the quality of the show. And in a way that works. As we dive deeper into each person, because these people are horrible people. This is a cast of just terrible people. And as we reveal layers of their being just nightmares, the camera angles get more intense. There's more close-ups. We were able to cut from here to there more often. And I am so pleased with the final product.
I mean, it's better than I could have ever dreamed it would be. You know, especially like I remember when we were doing the last rounds of review, and then all of a sudden the subtitles.
Oh,
and so you know exactly what's happening in the drama. There's no guesswork. You know, and like I remember, you know, and I love watching opera in person, but like it's hard sometimes to follow, if it's even above their heads, or if it's like printed and then the lights are dim. You just get tired after a certain point of trying to read and follow along. And so, but with this, that's one of the other perks of a video production is that translation is right with what that action's going on. And you can really get a sense of the characters. And what it did for me is it made me appreciate the knowledge that our students had of their characters without seeing that translation. Like you could, I was really even more impressed with our students watching it with the translation. At the end,
Well, one thing I liked about being able to film it is, as a director, I was able to force the audience to look at what I wanted them to look at and to see it from the perspective I wanted to see it. I also wasn't restricted to a proscenium approach. People on the stage, audience is sitting there watching. Like Josh is sitting on the stage where we filmed. I was able to actually many times have the camera sitting, looking out across the audience. So I was able to get a 360-degree perspective, and at times even move all the way around characters. And that allowed us to use our stage is very wide and very narrow depth-wise. And we spent a lot of time shooting across it. And this was a trick we used because we could only be 6 feet apart. I positioned people in a V where they look like they're standing next to each other, but in depth-wise, they're covering approximately 30 feet. But
the force, what is it? Force projection?
I use force perspective, yes. And we use that a lot in the show. And at first, the cast did not understand what I was doing. And it's kind of funny as I was trying to get them to move stage left to stage right. I'd say, okay, so-and-so, scoot to your stage left. Your other stage left.
But John, since you did that, okay, and I talked to my wife about it, we're watching TV, right? And their TV shows that have been filmed since COVID started.
And they do the
And
same.
we've started to see this forced perspective trick used in like television productions that we watch all the time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so it's
brilliant.
I invented it. No, no, I did not.
Yes, those royalty checks will begin to come in.
Yes, they were. Yes, that is my technique. Actually, it's an old scenic design thing. You use it in scenic design if you want to have a very deep stage, make it look like a deep stage. You force perspective the drawing. I just did the same thing with people, and it worked. And especially in the reading of the will, and the fights between Schicchi and Zita and Loretta and Renuccio. A lot of that takes place. So I think that I know our students learned a lot. I've heard the comments from them tell me that we made the right decision to proceed the way we did. So many programs just weren't able to do things this year, and I think a lot of this one we have a dean who trusted us.
And hope he still does.
And I hope so.
I'm pretty sure he does.
Really. And supported us and knew that our goal was to get the kids in something on stage, and supported that goal. And
yeah, I think we were all committed to like, we're going to do something. You know, we want them to have, because some of these seniors, I mean, they've been in opera every year, you know, and they're very committed, and we felt we wanted them to have a meaningful experience, whatever that ended up looking like.
And our freshmen who stepped up as production assistants, because typically we don't cast freshmen into any roles. Some of them did actually have some of the smaller roles this year, but they became our backbone as production assistants, making sure everything happened and everything worked. They were a strong part of why this functioned. But I think the main reason this worked is because we had a great experience with Alfred Staying's history last year. And I think you and I learned how to work together on that. And it literally became this year a case of this needs to get solved, and just whoever could solve it would solve it. And I do know, you know, my situation being not being able to be on campus, there were so many times that I'd say, Josh, I'm going to come up there just for a little bit for rehearsal. And you would literally bar me at the door. And
well, I also remember, you may not have heard this conversation I had with the cast, but for the first time in my career, and hopefully for a long time, I mean, for conductors, we're not big about giving up responsibility or trusting other people to do stuff. I mean, some of us are. We have to challenge ourselves to trust people to do things musically. But like, I remember there was a point where you'd made a list of like, you're going to get these things, and you're going to get these things, and you're going to go get these things, and you'd given it all out. Everybody knew. Our stage manager had the extra copies and was making sure everybody knew what to do. And I remember there came a day where like you had signed off, and we were sitting there in the dance studio, and I looked at him and I said, if those microphones do not make it back to these faculty offices after every rehearsal, and they come to my office, I'm not dealing with it. You're going to have to deal with it. And so I just was like, there came a point where I was like, I cannot do more than what I'm doing. And I actually had to verbalize it, which is not normal for me. But I think, you know, we all had to figure out, and John had it, I mean, he literally could not do things that he was used to just doing.
Just doing, yeah.
You know, like starting rehearsal, you know, that used to be a thing. Like,
we had to put responsibility on students, and they took up that responsibility.
Yes. Yeah.
Which was wonderful. We have to remember that. We can do that more often. Yeah. Mental note. Yeah. But we also had two assistants, you and I both. I had Kaylee Morehart, and you had Lexi. All right, Lexi Ryan.
Yes,
was your assistant.
And thank God we both had them. Yes. Because you know, Lexi was my timer on the music rehearsals to make sure, and she's the perfect person to have in charge of that. And then she also would help me listen and grade certain chunks, and help me figure out scheduling which things needed a little more time and everything. That was invaluable. and talk about great experience as a music ed major
Oh, yes.
for what she's going to be walking out into. And then,
Well,
I mean,
and Kylie, I would panic, and she'd just sit there, and she'd wait for me to stop panicking, and then she'd tell me what we are going to do as a solution.
yeah. I mean, like, talk about trusting her with your life. I mean, you know, it's interesting because I think she's planning to go into the medical profession,
Yes, a nurse, yes.
and I'm sitting here going, man, boy, if I could only be so lucky as to have her as a nurse or a doctor, you know, because I know I'm in good hands, you know, and that's the way she showed herself to be
And she would also
remarkable.
say when she didn't know how to do something, she would simply say, I don't know how to solve this.
Yeah,
Rather than see that as a fault, she would know that I needed to know that information, and then together we'd talk about how to fix things and how to solve things. And she would also do that between the two of us when things were just frantic. She'd sit and listen to the two of us and hear a solution
oh yeah.
when we were doing things.
And Lord only knows how many problems she solved before we even knew they
Oh,
were.
yes, yes. Yeah. Well, it did. I told her at one point, it got to the point I would start to think, oh, I need this. And at that moment, it would appear. She had already anticipated what needed to take place. Um, yes. So this was, there is no single star of the show. There is no one who is the guiding light of the show. It was definitely a group effort.
Oh yeah.
I couldn't have done it without you. I mean, gosh, you just kept me calm so much.
Well, and vice versa. You know, there'd be like times I'm like, I can't sing this, you know, or I can't hear or whatever. And I remember I'd go out into and you weren't able to hear the musical stuff sometimes.
No, yes.
And see that, like our first production together, I trusted your ears. Like,
Yes,
I
yes.
go, is the
Well, that's-
balance
yeah.
okay?
You had my ear and I had your eyes, and
Yeah.
we didn't
Have any
well,
of that.
yeah.
I mean, so it was lovely to be able to go back to my office and call and just say, oh my gosh, you know, how are we going to make this work? And then
yes.
we'd sort of talk each other off the ledge and then make a plan, you know, and then
And then we'd send out that plan, and I guess that came across as organized, and in a way, it was an organization. I don't think there was any way that it wasn't going to be fraught with frustration. There just wasn't. But boy, it was nice. We all had the exact same goal. And when you all have the exact same goal and there's no one trying to do something different, things do tend to work out. And however we get there is a good thing. So,
Yeah.
But yeah, so now we've got, wonder what we're going to do next year. That's the big, the kids are going to start whispering and wondering. So that's the big question. Good question.
it'll be great. I know that.
But now we've got something documented, and my memories of COVID will be stretching our boundaries as artists, stretching our students' boundaries, showing them that when they leave here, and for the vast majority of them, they're going to be music educators, that they can work with whatever they've got every day and put on an opera. If they want to put on an opera, they can put on an opera. They can do whatever they want to do. And if they take that lesson away from this, then we have done our jobs.
But I still will say, this probably pushed them musically more than a standard opera production pre-COVID, because they had to rise faster and they had to solve their own musical problems and be consistent. I mean, the level of consistency required vocally to you get 2 shots to do this right. I think we did 2 shots of O Mio Babino straight through, and then we did one. She wanted to do it one more time, and we had 5 minutes, and I said, well, I'm never going to tell Melody no, And so, of course, we did it one more time, and then it was like, they had to have that professional level of consistency, and I want to do everything in my power at Ouachita to push for that with our students, because if they can do that, then if a real world situation doesn't demand that, then they're fully capable. But if it does, they're capable as well.
Yes.
And And I think a lot of times having the luxury of just an open-ended amount of time for rehearsal gives all of us a sense of complacency of like, well, I kind of learned this score as the conductor on the fly. Or, maybe I don't need to sing that rhythm right at the beginning of this rehearsal, so I'll just wait till the music director tells me to fix it. Or I got all this time to block. I mean, I know you know this, John, like I've sat in show productions in high schools that I've worked at where we would take 6 hours to do one scene.
Yes.
And there'd be people sitting out that had to just be there and sit for that 6 hours, like sitting out drooling on themselves just because they were told they had to be there, right? And so, like, we didn't have that, and I think it pushed us musically, it pushed us artistically, pushed our minds certainly, and then we were all exhausted like we would have been in any production. But the thing we get is we get this really great product, artifact that we can have and we look back on, as long as we're alive and, share with our colleagues and friends that, hey, we pulled this off at Ouachita, so.
Yes, we came together
Can
at
be
a time
done.
at a time when many people weren't trying anything. We said, no, we can work together and use all our skill sets and create something. It's going to be something new, something different, something that responds to the times, and something that doesn't hide from the times, but something that at the same time celebrates us as artists and
Yep.
celebrates the art of music that we're all here to study and to teach. So great. Well, I think that's pretty good, don't you?
Yeah, I do too.
Okay, cool.